the way I think about COVID is a good example of the way these things go wrong. So basically, that view of the world says, when the public has to make decisions about virology, who are we going to call? And the oligarchic answer is, obviously, we are going to call the virologists. Oh, what, are we going to call your aunt in Iowa? What? Right. Excuse me, the one I saw from the plane at 30,000 feet? Are we going to call the people at the rodeo? No, we'll call the virologists, right? I got it. I'm brilliant, right? So, this was their answer, and this is a 20th century answer. This is, the idea of basically just delegating without any accountability, responsibility for important decisions to academics, basically kind of dates mostly to the Woodrow Wilson era.
Yes.
So, the progressive era with a capital P, right. It's about, and this is when basically America's, so if you see description of the Gilded Age, go to an old American city, see all those brick buildings and beautiful old stuff, all of DC, all of that is built in what we call the Gilded Age, which is a period when America was governed very much the way China is now. It was very corrupt. Politics was this incredibly sordid, screwed up business. Shit got done.
Yes.
Shit got done in a corrupt way with people stealing a bunch.
Yep.
But did shit get done at enormous velocity, really fast, all the time, in the physical world, not just building some goddamn software? Absolutely. Right? Look at the way they built the Empire State Building. Right? This is the world that built the Empire State Building. So, and at this time, America, like China, is a third world country. It's culturally insecure. It does not have, before World War I, it's a peninsula of Anglo-American culture. The center is in London and has always been in London. The center of finance is in London. America is the periphery. American intellectuals look at this and they're like, we should be the future. Look at a map. And what we actually need is essentially, and you'll see this written very, very explicitly, for example, in Walter Lippmann, who I'm sure you've read.
Yeah.
Right? And what America needs is basically a new class of Platonic guardians, a new class of basically people who are sort of, just are not these sordid, stealing politicians. So this comes out of people like Henry Adams, for example.
Yes.
Who's this fourth generation super, he's from this amazing political dynasty. He's the intellectual leader of America, as the editor of the North American Review, which was the New Yorker of its day, but better. And he's basically that whole world of old money and old wealth is no, actually, this isn't working. And the new world will be a world of science. And it needs to be guided by science, and it needs to be guided by expertise. What comes out of that is the invention of sort of all these social sciences, which are really sciences of government, or probably in most cases pseudosciences of government, because they don't actually seem to work out very well when you try them, which is a thing that normally...
Sociology, psychology.
Yeah. And so, all of these things, so you get sort of all of these sciences that are basically sciences of government and sciences of how the government should do something. And once sort of any kind of governing power, whether it's the people or a king or anything other than an oligarchy, decides that the oligarchy has the last vote, and it's the oligarchy's opinion that counts, and basically delegates it to the experts, the scientists, the mandarins, the priests, whatever you call them, you've ceded power to these people.
And then
and the consequence,
democracy's done at that point.
Oh yeah, democracy. Yeah, remember my two no's, right? It isn't and it shouldn't be, and it can't be. And the American people just simply don't have the power to do that. They don't have the energy. They don't have the knowledge. They don't have the energy. It's not a question of even whether they would do it well or badly. They would just do it weakly, and power would be instantly ripped from their hands. It would be like having an absolute monarch who's 6 years old. There's no way this kid, even if he's the rightful king of France, is actually the king of France.
Right.
So, his best choice is to use whatever power he has to make sure some guy who's not molesting him is the king of France. That's basically where we are, right? Sorry, that was a little coarser than my usual analogy.
So good.
But
let her rip.
Yeah, let her rip, right? And so the problem is what this does to the experts. So it's like you basically have this pool of expertise. You have this network of expertise. And if you have a network of expertise in something that has no possible effect on power at all, like astronomers, you'll look at American astronomy and you say, has this been corrupted by power? You know, have astronomers, is there a woke astronomy, not just woke staff practices in astronomy, but like seeing like constellations that aren't there, making up like new kinds of astronomical objects, just like totally out of nowhere, like for like, for headlines, no, I don't think we see that. Is there a woke math? No, I don't think we see that. When we look at the Soviet Union, again, centralized, system, but still with many oligarchic, had a party, right? But it also had a leader. And you look at the Soviet Union, the math is fine. The math is perfectly fine. The astronomy is fine. Soviet astronomy, no, they're studying the same skies that we're studying. Soviet sociology, Soviet psychology, Marx-Lenin studies. It's all just trash. And so when you look at American expertise, you tend to notice that the fields that are funny, that get weird and kind of screwed up, are ones that involve telling the government what decisions to make.
Right.
And it seems that when you have a field, a way of people thinking that involves telling the government what decisions to make, suddenly you have this marketplace of ideas, and as a believer in oligarchy, you're like, okay, not only do we not have just one expert, we have a whole network of experts, and they're convincing each other, they're always arguing, and they're participating in this adversarial discourse. Yeah, in math, that's what's going on. In astronomy, that's what's going on. In chemistry, that's what's going on. There's no politicized chemistry in the Soviet Union, right? But when it comes to sociology, or like anything that involves advising the government, if you're advising the government to do more, by definition, you're making more of an impact. You matter more. And so what happens in an oligarchy is sort of this kind of currency of the trade becomes impact. It becomes mattering. And so, let's say that you're studying Earth's climate. Back in like 1970, you were just studying Earth's climate. You were just like a weather nerd who was like, oh yeah, let's study the weather in a long term. Suddenly, you're sort of forced into the position where there is this global effect. Does it matter? Is it scary? What's going on here? And I'm what's called a lukewarmist, where yes, this effect is real, but I don't think it's all that important. And there are plenty of very pedigreed climate scientists who are lukewarmists, and let's say Judith Curry, for example. And if you're someone like Judith Curry, you have would be a great person to have on, by the way. If you're someone like Judith Curry, she ran like the whole huge climatology lab for many, many years. If you're someone like Judith Curry and you basically write a paper that says, this isn't very important, this is like happening, but there's probably Afghanistan is something we should worry about more. And you're attacking yourself. You're attacking all of your peers. You're saying your work is not very important. You should not be getting a lot of money. You do not matter very much at all. And you're not being a team player. And so in the landscape of the marketplace of ideas, things that say this whole marketplace is unimportant and shouldn't grow its budget next year are vastly disfavored, because basically they're really, really antisocial. And and so that sort of craving, when you're inside the deep state and you have that craving for impact, it has a much more definite form. You're basically looking for funds. There's this whole world of things that write grants, that apply for funds. And so this whole world basically has this enormous incentive to emphasize its importance and to matter and to make an impact. Well, guess who wanted to make an impact? Some virologists. And these virologists were like, going along, doing virology, just being virology nerds, and then SARS happened. SARS happened, and this virus jumped out of a bat into a civet cat, into human beings, and killed a lot of people. Unfortunately, wasn't well enough adapted to humans to start a pandemic. So naturally, if something bad happens, and you're writing a grant, a good way to write that grant is to say, well, this something bad could happen again. Let's study this thing. to understand it, to make sure we're better equipped to something if it happens again. We can predict it. We can learn more about this phenomenon. This is important science because this is something real that has affected the real world. Good grant proposal. So basically, you write that grant proposal, and you're like, I know what. Let's go into like bat caves in China and find all the bat viruses and see if these bat viruses could emerge into humans. And how will we see if they could emerge into humans? Well, we'll screw around with them and try to make them into human viruses. What could go wrong, right? And the ostensible goal, and this was not a Chinese research project. This was an American research project started by a Chinese grad student here who went back to Wuhan and was doing that there. The infamous Batwoman, Xi Jinping, right? But this was American science. I think Americans probably maintain their virology labs a little more carefully. If you've ever been to China.
Yeah.
There's this word in Chinese. My daughter speaks Chinese, so she's going to yell at me for screwing this up on there. 差不多, which means good enough. And so you're basically saying, okay, we're going to have this, and that was one of the two things that happened in China. The other thing is, I don't know if you're familiar with the phenomenon of the Chinese paper mill. So in science, of course, which has been subjected to these kind of bureaucratic goals, your goal is to publish as many papers as possible. And so you do everything as you can do to publish high-impact papers, as many as you can. That's how you succeed in science today. In China, it's even much more rigorous than that. It's like, you've got to get 5 high-impact papers in this journal to be the head of your lab. It's like totally quantitative. And so you get a lot of production of basically low-quality papers from China in a lot of different fields, including my field of computer science. And so what you had was basically people going out, virologists going out, finding all the bat viruses they could, screwing around with them in labs in countries that everyone involved in this research had an incentive to exaggerate the danger of the research because they had to exaggerate the importance of the research.
Of course.
The more dangerous your virus is, the more important it is. So basically what you've done with virology by saying the virologists should run the show because decisions about what virology to study should be taken by virologists, naturally you're going to get gain-of-function research because these virologists are basically in this like Darwinian cycle of exaggerating their own importance, and the more dangerous these viruses are, the more important they are.
So it's inevitable they will wind up creating viruses.
Yeah, they will actually wind up creating the virus that they are then literally hired to solve.
Okay, so
this is the case of Dr. Fauci, right? And so you basically created this system of incentives, to sort of step back a second and talk about how these oligarchies work.
But this is not a sustainable system that you're describing.
This is not a sustainable system, but it degrades slowly. And so what happens is this system was initially populated by these really wise and capable people, the Americans of the first half of the century. Can we say they were diverse? No, we cannot say that. But it was, they were amazing people. They got shit done. They conquered the world. They were a big deal. They were the best and the brightest. They built the bomb, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Biggest engineering, hey, libertarians out there, biggest and best engineering project of the world, Manhattan Project.
Yeah. Government
project run like a startup. And the government project run like a startup. How can you can't do that anywhere today, right? And so, you're looking at this system of like, we're going to delegate these decisions to these oligarchs, these experts, these institutions, these prestigious things with the nice fonts and the black letter names that are super competitive and hard to get into. And what's happening is that you're feeding, there's this great Latin phrase, who will watch the watchdogs? I'd try Latin, but I'd screw it up. And then people would yell at me. And who should watch the watchmen? Right? And our answer is, we're going to have this decentralized collective network of watchmen that we're going to funnel all of this toxic, we know that power corrupts. And so we're going to basically act like the early Americans sucked at some things, and one of those things was environmentalism. And so we're going to basically say, you know what we're going to do with all our power pollution? We're basically going to just pipe it into this really big lake. And for a while that worked. For a while, basically you have this field of experts and you say, we're going to take these like intellectuals at these universities The ideas of like universities telling the government what to do, like in 1900, is ridiculous. It's like a weird. They do that in Germany, right? And now it's like assumed, like, my God, no. How would you, like, the government would decide on its own? On it, maybe the intelligence community does that sometimes. They don't seem to do a very good job of that. No. Of course you ask Harvard. And what you're doing is you're basically, when you say, of course you ask Harvard, you're pumping power into these institutions. And what you don't realize is you're polluting them with power. And after a while, instead of getting this answer which people have disagreed on and fought over intellectually and been all philosophical about, like, the way you're imagining these things, working, no, you're actually just being told what you wanted to hear. And so you have this whole system of who actually makes decisions, who actually makes calls.